Any particular music you want to put on? I've got an aux. I looked up at the Uber driver from the back passenger seat and said, "Ah, no, thanks for the offer though. I've got earbuds. I think I'm gonna try to catch some Z's while you drive, if that's alright. Let me know if you need anything or when we arrive anywhere." "Okay, sounds good. Have a good night's sleep there," the man chuckled. "Thanks," I expelled, before nodding back down to huddle over my phone. I'd been in that car for about an hour now, and I had about another 3 left to go. I didn't even know Ubers could drive for that long before I looked it up, but it turns out if you've got the cash, you've got the ride. But I didn't really have the cash, to be honest. I had to take out all of the money I'd earned over the summer before college to pay for it, which sucked, but I didn't really have a choice. This was happening, and it was happening quick. I looked out of the window to my side at the passing trees and cornfields in the distance, beaten out only by the dense forest miles away. I sighed as I dug my hand into my pocket, fishing for the cheap iPod earbuds I've had for the past 4 years. How they still worked, I had no idea. Every other pair of supposedly higher quality earbuds I've ever had died on me within a year, but I guess Apple products are just made to last. Plugging them in and loading up Spotify, I saw that Lil Peep's new album had just dropped and put it on with an unenthusiastic tap. I leaned back in my seat and looked out of the window once more, resting my head against the soothingly cool glass. Rain had begun to fall and a light drizzle since I'd last peered out, which simultaneously relaxed and unnerved me. I usually love the rain, and even find myself turning on multiple hour-long rain videos on YouTube when I can't sleep. But under the circumstances, it set a rather mysterious and sinister tone, like there was some sort of meaning to it, even though I knew logically that wasn't the case. As the rain began to pick up and the music took over my senses, I closed my eyes and thought back to everything that had led me to this car ride. The memories came flooding back to me in a wave so strong, it felt as though I was hallucinating. It started about 2 months ago, the night and moment I met Darren. Like most gamers who enjoy multiplayer matchmaking, I've met quite a few interesting characters online. Most of the time we just meet in the match and never speak again, but every once in a while I'll add them to my friends list or they'll add me, and even fewer times than that we actually end up developing a legitimate friendship. I met Darren in a Halo 5 match, and yes, I know a lot of people hate that game with a fiery passion, but I enjoy it, so whatever. He was a really funny guy and we got along pretty well and pretty fast. I eventually started inviting him to the group calls I have with a few other friends of mine, and before I knew it, he was part of the gang. And besides that, there was really nothing noteworthy or interesting about him. At least not interesting enough to write about here, until about a week and a half ago. It wasn't uncommon for us to be up late into the AMs playing Black Ops 4, and most of the time my friends would drop off one at a time throughout the night as they had to head to bed either out of exhaustion or out of necessity, for work or other personal obligations. I'm a bit of a night owl and an insomniac, so I'm pretty much always up until sunrise. Darren used to go to bed at around the same time as the rest of them, but eventually seemed to fall into a similar schedule to mine. I felt bad he got on such a shitty schedule, but at the same time I was happy to have the company. I was in another average group call on another average night, playing another average game of Black Ops 4 last week when the incident that sparked all of this occurred. All of my other friends had fallen asleep or gone off to do God knows what, and it was down to just Darren and I. We were playing different games at this point. I was fucking around in Minecraft, and I think he was on Grand Theft Auto 5 running from the cops on a motorcycle or some shit. But we stayed in the call to chat for a bit anyways. Like you do when you don't have anything relevant to talk about, we started bullshitting, bringing up random topics to try and find something we'd both latch onto. We bounced some lighthearted stuff around for a while, but eventually got pretty deep. I told him a bit about my parents' divorce, and he told me about his troubled upbringing as well. Eventually, we somehow got on the topic of personal regrets. There's probably too many things I regret to count if I'm gonna be honest, man, I said. I spend way too much time mulling over the past in my head. I'm a pretty conflicted person. Yeah, I can understand that, I guess. I don't really have many regrets in life myself. I try to just go with the flow and never look back, you know? Darren said, with a smirk I could actually hear on his face. Right, I sighed. I wish I could do that. Yeah, he exhaled, followed by a few moments of silence. You know, there probably are a few things I should regret, though, he said. Like what? Oh, I don't know. I've done some things in my life I don't think most people would even be capable of, Darren said. You gonna tell me you murdered somebody or something? I sarcastically joked with a slight chuckle. The silence that followed disturbed me. I mean, Darren paused. Does the legal definition of murder include intent? That was not the response I was expecting or wanted to hear. What the hell was he talking about? If he really expects me to believe he killed someone, he's definitely got more than a few screws loose. I know I haven't known this guy for all that long, and I don't even really know what he looks like. But this conversation was getting into a weird territory I was not comfortable with, but was a little more than curious about. I'm not sure. I spoke softly. There were another few moments of silence. I pulled up my friends list and saw that he had left his game. It was now sitting on the Xbox Live dashboard, doing nothing. Well, I'm getting pretty tired. I think I should probably head to bed, I said. Yeah, Darren uttered, as if he had just broken out of a daze. I should be getting to sleep too. Oh, and I've been meaning to ask you, do you have a Snapchat by any chance? Without much thought, I responded, yeah, I'll message you my username after I get off the call. Cool, he said. Sweet dreams. Darren left the call. That night, I was lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the bizarre comments Darren had made, when, out of the blue, I received a snap from Darren. I opened my phone and loaded up the image, which he had set to stay visible indefinitely. Expecting a selfie or a goofy photo of some kind, what I found upon looking at the screen threw me for a loop. The image was of what looked like some kind of unfinished basement, with concrete floors and walls, and thick support beams scattered throughout. Puddles of water littered the floor, along with crumpled up tissue papers or maybe paper towels. From what I could see, it looked more or less empty, aside from what looked like a big pile of something, covered with a grayish sheet in the far corner of the room. I stared at it for a few moments before tapping it again to a close. I thought about saving the photo just because of how weird it was, but didn't want to alarm him in case he wasn't cool with that. Maybe he was trying to send me a selfie or something, but accidentally took and sent a picture from his front-facing camera. The snap definitely looked either accidental or purposefully eerie. What the case actually was, I wasn't quite sure, but I had a feeling that if it was sent on purpose, waiting for another would be my best course of action. And so I did. After sending him the message, "Cool basement," I turned on an old episode of South Park from the second season, glancing over to the phone beside me every 30 seconds or so in anticipation. Luckily for me, it didn't take long before Darren pulled through once again. And this time, there were no doubts about his intent. He was still in the dark, damp basement, but had moved substantially closer to the pile hidden under the gray sheet. I could now see small, dark red splotches, about 4 or 5 of them splattered across the lumpy blanket. As my eyes moved down the image from top to bottom, I was met with a text at the very end. "Thank you," Darren had typed. The urge to save the image was overwhelming, but I worried that if I did so, Darren would either stop sending them to me or get upset or something. Instead, I just decided to close Snapchat and try to get some sleep once again. Right back where I was before I received the bizarre photos, I now had even more to contemplate. Why did he send me those photos, and what were they even of? Is that his basement, or were the photos taken somewhere else? And what's under that gray stained sheet, and why did he move the camera closer to the pile for the second photo? Thinking about the red stains and the bizarre comments Darren had made earlier in the night, a couple of wild racing possibilities entered my mind. Maybe he's a prolific serial killer, and the sheet concealed his collection of bloody remains. Or maybe he's a bit of a prankster, and set up the whole thing to try to freak me the fuck out. As the thought came to my mind, I found it somewhat comforting. Yeah, it's probably all just one big joke. A weird joke, a stupid joke, a certifiably fucked up joke, but a joke nonetheless. I turned off my TV and closed my weary eyes. As I began to drift off into REM sleep, I heard the faint words of a friend whispered into my left ear. So close, I could almost feel his breath, though I knew it was simply a hypnagogic hallucination brought on by the beginning of the dream state. "Sweet dreams," Darren whispered as I floated off into nothing. After sleeping on the events from the previous night, I had calmed down substantially and was fairly convinced that Darren was indeed trolling me. I felt like a little bit of a dumbass for getting so wrapped up in it and actually letting him freak me out. How could I be so gullible? I sent him a text saying, "That was pretty good, man, you really got me," before sliding the phone into my pocket and heading out the door to start my day. Darren usually responds within, I'd say at least an hour or so. But 5 hours later, by the time I was driving home from the shitty grocery store I work at, there was still no response. I tried not to think anything of it, but as the evening came and went, I started to get a little nervous. It really was unlike him to ignore a text for this long. I logged onto Xbox Live and checked my friends list to see if he'd been online at all throughout the day, and saw that he was indeed online, but wasn't playing anything. Just sitting on the dashboard, similar to late last night. That wasn't the most intriguing thing to me, though. It appeared as though he had decided to change his profile icon. Whereas before he sported a Dom photo from Gears of War, it had now been changed to a completely black image with white text. And the text was an address. I stared at the lines, reading it over and over again in disbelief. I'm not going to release it here for obvious reasons, but I will tell you it was a couple of states away. Confused, I got out my laptop and typed the address into Google Maps. What came up would only serve to confuse me even more. Upon clicking enter, the address took me to a cemetery. I clicked on Google Street View to try and get a better look and maybe even explore a little bit, but I didn't have much luck. Looks like those Google cars they have driving around didn't actually enter the grounds. But looking to the side, something else caught my eye. In the background, hidden partially behind a slew of large oak trees, was a tiny, dilapidated shack of a house. Despite it looking like it was on the verge of condemnation, that's not really what brought my attention to it. The thing that caught my eye was the little gray sheet covering something about half the size of a car in their backyard. As if on cue, a short ding came from my phone. It was another snap from Darren. I took a deep breath and loaded up the image. This time the camera was much closer to the covered mass in the basement, taking up almost the entire frame. I quickly looked from my phone to my laptop screen, comparing the color of the sheets. Despite the lighting and quality differences, they did look more or less the same. The only major difference being that the sheet in the backyard didn't have obvious bloodstains splattered across it. Don't think that'd go over too well with the neighbors. Regardless, I didn't really have enough evidence to conclude that that was the exact same sheet. At least not yet. I moved the camera around to Google Street View and eventually got to a spot where I was across from the left side of the house, maybe 40 feet away or so. With a much better view of my target, I leaned in close studying the cloth, but it was just too far away. I got out the snipping tool and took a screenshot of the cloth, and then loaded it up in Photoshop. I zoomed in looking for any other sign that would identify it as the one in Darren's Snapchats. Unfortunately, I found what I was looking for. It wasn't much, and it definitely wasn't obvious, but the edge of the blanket farthest away from me, that I could still see in the photo, was stained slightly red in a thin little streak. I quickly picked up my phone, praying to God I hadn't clicked away from Darren's latest snap. Fortunately, I hadn't. I compared the thin red line running parallel to the edge of the blanket in the backyard image to the Snapchat photo. Although the backyard one didn't have the dark red splotches that littered Darren's snaps, they did both share the same lone red streak. Bingo. I closed the snap and sent Darren another text. Hey man, what's up with the cemetery address in your Xbox profile picture? And what's up with those weird snaps you kept sending me? This time, I had to wait only a few minutes for a response back, and after all of Darren's bizarre behavior, I was pretty shocked, to say the least. His text read, Hey man, sorry, I've been kinda sick since last night after I got off the call. I think I caught some sort of stomach bug, but I'm feeling a lot better now. Lucky me though, it looks like most of my social media accounts were hacked last night too. I just got them back though, so it's all good. Really? Darren expects me to believe that right after he insinuated he may have murdered someone, he suddenly fell ill, and all of the weird shit that was sent to me from his Snapchat was done by some weird hacker that managed to break into all of his accounts. Yeah, I don't fucking think so. I may be a bit gullible sometimes, but I'm not that bad. Oh man, that sucks. I'm glad you're feeling better though. I typed. Did you happen to see the profile photo the hacker replaced your Xbox Live icon with? He very quickly responded with, Yeah, it was just black. It was just black, huh? Okay. He was definitely trying to fuck with me now. Or maybe he really was hacked, and all of this is just a big coincidence. Or maybe he lost his goddamn mind after spilling the beans to me about his past last night, and he snapped out of it just a few minutes ago. This is probably just his attempt at damage control. Fuck, this is so weird. I texted him back and forth about nothing in particular a few more times before heading to bed. My head was spinning, and I didn't know what to believe or what to think, so I decided to try and do what I always do when faced with a tough situation, and sleep on it once again. I didn't hear Darren's words whispered into my ear tonight, though I might as well have. I just kept playing the events of the past 2 days over and over again in my mind's eye, until eventually, my consciousness ceased. Getting home from work the next day, I decided to finally send Darren another text. I'd woken up that morning not wanting to even deal with any of this shit anymore, but had found myself being way too distracted to actually let it go. I pulled out my phone and typed, Hey man, you want to play some Black Ops 4 tonight? He said yes, and we planned to get on in around 30 minutes or so at 4 o'clock. When the time came, I plugged in my headset, turned on my console, and prepared myself for what was to come. I wanted to try to figure out the truth, what's really going on, and that would probably involve me poking and prodding him a bit for answers. Oh well, I guess we'll see how this goes. Eventually, he invited me to a call. After we got into a game and finished the necessary 20 minutes of pointless bullshitting, I moved on to what I was really there to talk about in the first place. So when did you find out all of your accounts were hacked, man? I asked. Basically right before you texted me yesterday, he said. It was a nightmare, man. I had to reset all of my passwords and everything. Yeah, that must have been pretty freaky. I can't imagine going through something like that, I said, trying to think of the best way to approach my next statement. I got some pretty weird snaps from your account last night, I said bluntly. Now, I was prepared for him to emphatically deny any knowledge of the snaps and play it off like he didn't know what the fuck I was talking about. But just like the last voice call I had with him, the long, unnerving silence that followed my statement was unfortunately very telling. "Oh, yeah?" he mumbled. "That's weird." "Yeah, it was," I said. "Really weird." Another uncomfortable pause. "You curious about what it was?" I asked, honestly shocked I had to ask. Yeah, sorry, what was it?" he uttered, sounding frazzled and caught off guard. "You know," I began, "I'm not quite sure." I clicked on him, but I think my phone glitched or something, and they never really loaded up. That was the biggest, most blatant lie I could have possibly told, but his responses up until this point had told me all I needed to know, and I was curious to hear his reaction to my fib. "Oh, really?" he said with a big exhale. "Wow, yeah, man, I wonder what it was. Huh, that's too bad. That's too bad." It was as though I could hear that smirk on his face, yet again. We quickly got off the topic, and after a few matches, I told him I had to go. I turned off my Xbox One and pulled out my phone. I checked the balance in my bank account before loading up Uber and ordering a ride. I stepped outside and took a seat in the grass on my front lawn, waiting patiently for my trip to begin. "We're here." I opened my eyes to meet the ones of my Uber driver in the front seat. "We're here, son," he said again. The Lil Peep album I'd put on had ended long ago, and I somehow managed to sleep through almost the entirety of the ride here. The rain had stopped, though maybe it was still falling back where I was hours ago, and the sun had set to let the moon rule the night. I rubbed my eyes and let out a massive yawn. "Okay, well, thanks for the ride here. Say, what are the chances you'd be willing to hang out here for a bit so I can take the ride home with you? If not, I'm just gonna have to track somebody else down to make the long haul." "I guess I could stick around for a little bit, but how long depends on how much," he said, rubbing his thumb together with his middle and forefinger. I nodded and pulled the wallet out of my pocket. "I've got about $50 on me. How much time will that buy me?" I asked. "I can wait about 30 minutes, but that's it," he said. With a tired look in his face I could tell meant he was serious. I looked at my clock to see it was 11:30. "Alright, that'll work." I exited the car, stepping onto the ground right in front of the entrance to the cemetery I discovered via Darren's supposedly hacked Xbox Live profile photo the day before. It was pretty surreal, to be honest. I couldn't believe I was actually standing there. What in the hell was I doing? What did I expect to get out of all this? I guess I knew Darren's accounts weren't really hacked. I knew he did actually send me those Snapchat messages, and he did actually change his own Xbox Live icon. The basement and the photos were of his house, as well as the stained gray sheet and whatever was underneath it. I knew he was telling the truth to me the night this all started, when we were still in that voice chat. I knew the police would never get involved, and if something sinister was going on, they'd need evidence. I was here to gather that evidence. I looked over to my left to find the rotted shack of a house I had seen the previous day. It was dark, but there was enough light around to make it out. I walked over from the cemetery, making sure to walk behind trees and out of any direct light that come my way. Upon entering what I could only assume was Darren's backyard, I noticed the pile in the sheet I had seen from Google Maps was gone. This wasn't surprising in the least, given the Snapchats I'd received. In fact, that's kind of what I was expecting. I looked around and considered my options. I could see there was a back door and there was a front door. There were some windows on both sides of the house as well. I was weighing which entrance was worth a try as I started walking around the backyard to the right side of the house, hidden away from the street in view of the cemetery by a large cluster of trees. When I got to the other side, I couldn't help but smile. There was one of those old cellar staircase entrances, like the one Dorothy's family enters at the beginning of The Wizard of Oz. It had a metal crowbar wedged under the door handles, but no lock. I couldn't believe this. My good luck was insane. I rushed over to the cellar door and removed the crowbar. I glanced down at my watch. It was about 11:30 p.m. now. Hopefully, enough time for me to get in there, find out whatever was under that pile, gather some sort of evidence, and get the fuck out of there. Lifting the unlatched doors, a strong and pungent smell of sour and decay hit my nostrils with a punch. I about gagged, but held it together for the sake of time. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight feature. Below me was a steep flight of wooden stairs that I wouldn't even dare putting a 5-pound weight on under normal circumstances. But tonight was no normal night. Upon arriving at the bottom, I looked around to find pretty much exactly what I had expected. A barren, dark, damp concrete basement, or cellar, or whatever you want to call it. I panned my flashlight from left to right, and upon reaching the far corner of the room, found exactly what I had come to find. The stained gray sheet, and whatever was underneath it. Walking towards it, I began to notice something I hadn't, and by all reason couldn't, have noticed in the photos. It was moving. Not rapidly or fast or anything, but very steadily in a small area about the size of my fist in the top center of the pile, up and down in an almost rhythmic fashion. My heart rate increased severely as I stared at whatever the fuck this was. I couldn't have closed my eyes even if I tried, I was so horrified. I took a few steps closer to the pile until I was standing directly in front of it. With the hand I wasn't using to hold the flashlight, I grabbed the left corner of the sheet and pulled with a firm and steady yank. What I revealed was close to my suspicions, to be fair, but much more bizarre than I could have ever imagined. It was a pile of corpses. Naked ones, half decayed and rotted, with maggots and God knows what else slowly devouring it. Some looked completely intact, while others were obviously slit at the throat, missing limbs, and other atrocities in that vein. But that was the least shocking thing about my find. Lying atop the severely rotted cadavers was a body that looked much more fresh than the others. It was too naked, but there was a striking difference that jumped out at me instantly in the way this corpse was mangled. Its chest cavity had been sliced down the middle and opened up like the doors to this cellar, exposing a protruding, still-beating heart. But it wasn't natural. 2 metal nail-looking things had been shoved into the organ, with wires running off to its side, behind the mangled pile of corpses. Feeling my heart in my throat beating 1,000 times a second, I inched my way over to the side and peeked behind the bodies. The poor soul's heart was connected to a car battery. Jesus fucking Christ. I covered my mouth with my free hand as I took in the sight. This was so demented and disgusting, and I wanted to leave as soon as possible. I unlocked my phone and got it ready to snap a few pictures I could take to the police when I heard a familiar voice come from behind me. "It's not what it looks like," Darren said, this time not through a shitty headset microphone. I turned my head quickly in a panic to see Darren standing before me. He was about 5'3" and was impossibly skinny, looking like he hadn't eaten or slept in weeks. His thin facial hair had grown out long past what would ever be considered passable, and the stains on his white oversized undershirt said it hadn't been washed in a lifetime. He wasn't wearing any pants or shoes or socks. Whether or not he was even wearing underwear was concealed under the length of his baggy shirt. I opened my mouth to attempt a response, but closed it after nothing came out. I stared at him, frozen to my spot, wondering where the fuck he came from and how I didn't hear him come down the stairs. I looked over his shoulder and could now see under the staircase. There was a small, maybe 15-inch LCD TV sitting atop a cardboard box, hooked up to an Xbox One, with a worn-down blue sleeping bag rolled out in front of it. I looked back to meet Darren's eyes. "I didn't mean to hurt any of them," he said. "I just wanted to find the cure." He began walking over to me slowly, which prompted me to immediately take some steps back. He stopped when he reached the pile of corpses and looked down at the cadaver with a still beating heart. He pet what used to be its head, with a look on his face that seemed to show some sort of empathy. I looked down at the mutilated body, and then up at Darren. I opened my mouth and asked, "A cure for what?" in a voice so meek, it was barely mine. He looked up at me with a hurt so great in his eyes, I could almost feel his pain. But could he feel the pain he had inflicted on all of these innocent people? What the fuck did he have to be so hurt about right now? He opened his mouth and whispered, "A cure for death." He sat down on the floor and looked at his pile. "I've been trying to find a cure for years now. It was only supposed to take one person, one soul, one sacrifice to save the lives of the entire human race. But it didn't work. Once I inflicted the disease in Shelley, I hooked her brain up to a power generator, but that just fried her. Then I tried on some homeless guy I found out by the river, but this time with just a car battery, which worked a little better to not burn up the body, but still wasn't the cure I was searching for. I've tried various substances and techniques I've developed in my mind over countless revelations from the one who reigns, but the closest I've ever gotten was slight eye movement with electricity applied directly to the heart. But it's not good enough. It's never fucking good enough." He looked down, resting his head in his hands, and began to sob. I looked at this man, this friend I had known for a little over a month. I then looked over to his gaming/bedroom setup he had under the staircase. Every game, every call, every minute I'd spent talking to this guy, he was under that dilapidated staircase, sitting in this disgusting cellar, just feet away from a pile of rotting corpses, most of which he conducts bizarre experiments on. I felt like I was going to pass out. I looked back at Darren, still sitting there, still crying, holding his head in his hands and covering his eyes. I looked around to see if there was anything else of interest down here, and then lifted my phone. I saw on the home screen clock that it was 11:57. I took a few pictures of the pile itself, and then a couple panned over to the side slightly to include Darren. He didn't seem to notice through his frantic sobs. I carefully began backing up towards the staircase, and then finally up the stairs. I turned my head to check on Darren after each step of the first half of the staircase, but when I got too high up to see him, I just made sure to be as quiet as possible and listened for his sobs. When I reached the top and stepped out of that horror show, I took in a deep breath and savored the air. I couldn't believe how fresh the cool night air smelled compared to the dank, musky rot of the decaying cadavers. I turned around and looked down into the cellar. His sobs were much more faint now, but still consistent nonetheless. I gingerly closed the cellar doors and took a few steps forward, back towards the cemetery and toward my ride. But then I stopped. I looked back for a moment at the cellar doors, taking in what would hopefully be one of my last moments here. I walked back to the doors and picked up the metal crowbar I had sat to the side, sliding it swiftly and firmly under the cellar's steel handles. And with that, I began my walk towards the cemetery. I never told the rest of my friends what happened to Darren. After I turned in the photos to the police that night, none of us ever heard from him again. I never called to see what came of the case, but I can only assume the obvious. I gotta say, it makes me think twice when I'm playing Xbox Live alone. What if the guy on the other side of the headset I'm talking to isn't what he plays himself off to be? I know this is paranoid thinking, and I'm sure my experience was an extremely rare outlier to the general trend. But put yourself in my shoes for a second, and ask yourself if you would feel any different having experienced the nightmare I went through that night. If you would, then please contact me, so that I can hopefully someday get over the horrors that plague my memory, and heal the scars that riddle my mind. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's narration. I want to give a huge thanks to last month's $5 and up patrons: Stephanie M, Baltic, Peggy, Silent Torture, Gage W, Shanda K, Jules L, Lydia P, Grayson H, Jeffrey B, Melted Dre, Devil's Advocate, Zero, and all the other $5 and up and $2 patrons on screen as well. All of your support makes these narrations possible, and I appreciate it a ton. If you'd like to join these lovely ghouls, I'd appreciate it if you check out my Patreon page. For just $1 a month, you'll get an exclusive narration that will never, ever be uploaded to my channel. Usually, one a bit too extreme for YouTube. So that's at least one extra video every month for just $1, if not more. For $2 a month, you'll get thanked in the end scroll of every video, and for just $5 a month, I'll shout you out at the end of multiple videos a month personally. You also get exclusive Discord roles for those perks as well. If you'd like to chat with me for a bit, you can join me on a monthly live stream for just $10 a month and get a signed merch sticker for $25 a month. And if you're in the market for some horrifying shirts and hoodies, you can head on over to my Teespring store in the description as well. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Second Clancy. I want to thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time. Have a good night, everybody. Cheers.